Hello, and thank you so much for dropping by this video. So I grew up in the Western world with, fundamentalist Christianity where it's like, believe every word of the Bible is true or spend an eternity in hell. Doesn't get any more hardcore than that in terms of what a religion is. Like, you have to fit yourself completely into this structure or you're blankety blanked. Starts with an F forever. Like I mean, that sounds more like a cult to me, but um, and so then a lot of us, me included, went to the other extreme of, well, spirituality is just about do whatever you want and do whatever you feel good, do whatever feels good. What I've come to realize, well, actually, I was just rebelling against that overly intense, overly intense structure to like excess, unbalanced, no discipline, no foundation, freedom that isn't actually end up free. And so, what's the sweet spot? What's the sweet spot? Because I was on the spiritual path for a long time. I knew all this stuff, had done all these different practices, all these workshops, had all these profound awakenings, but fundamentally, something was missing. And what I realized what was missing was grounding. And I mean that in so many ways, but one of the main ways I mean it is just a fundamental principle or truth or practice, because it was just like a smorgasbord of all these different things, which were all delectable and all delightful. But to make real progress in life does require some focus. And so we're awake enough to know that the like mold yourself into someone else's belief system and structure and ritual doesn't work. And hopefully we've tried this other, like, just do everything and and that doesn't really work either. Didn't work for me. I haven't met anyone it's worked for. Maybe you're out there, and if so, start a YouTube channel on it. So what's the middle ground? For myself, well, and actually, let me take one more piece. And so, a lot of what you have happening today in the modern spiritual world, which is, I really want to say, is the modern spiritual marketplace, because a lot of it is about money, is you have people acting as spiritual teachers who are not properly qualified to do so. So it's one thing to like do what I'm doing, like I'm giving a talk on spiritual things. It's another thing to give life advice and spiritual advice and to guide people on a path and to assume what's more accurately the guru role of like, hey, I'm going to guide you towards liberation. And one of my, someone commented so well, and if you want to identify yourself, just say hello in the comments. So this person wrote, those who come to satsang, meaning a spiritual gathering, much the same as those who go to a psychotherapist, deserve respect, compassion, empathy, and reasonable protection from harm, no matter how misguided or confused their thoughts and emotion may be. Meaning, she's saying that someone had said, well, hey, look, a lot of people who show, so a lot of what this channel is about deconstructing the harmful aspects of the modern spiritual world. And someone said, well, hey, don't blame the guru. Like, these people are showing up lost and confused. And one of my subscribers accurately wrote this comment. So I'm just going to read the whole comment. Also, part of that comment was that it seems that a lot of people in satsang are really lost. That sounds like victim blaming. Yes, of course, many lost and vulnerable people seek liberation from their suffering. How wonderful. Humanity suffers from unconsciousness and ignorance. Those who come to satsang, much the same as those who go to a psychotherapist, deserve respect, compassion, empathy, and reasonable protection from harm, no matter how misguided or confused their thoughts and emotions may be. This is why psychotherapists are licensed and have strict boundaries they must abide by for the protection of their patients. Because when working with hurting, vulnerable people, there's a great potential for harm because of the power differential. The seeker, whether psychological or spiritual, will naturally have a tendency to put the authority figure / teacher on a pedestal. This should never be taken advantage of, for example, to get free labor, money, or sex. To do so is most definitely abuse, no doubt about it whatsoever. A victim of this behavior is never to blame. Psychotherapists can lose their license to practice for any such offense and may even face criminal charges. Well said. And I'll let you identify yourself if you want to. The thing is that in more, let's look at India. To become a guru, to become a spiritual teacher, you had to go through rigorous training and then receive blessing from your guru. And then all of this was taken, and then you were in the context, you were in a tradition, much like a doctor is, kept an eye on by a medical board that certifies their right to practice practice medicine. In today's spiritual world, anyone can go out and act like a guru and spout spiritual truths without any qualifications. And we see what's going on is a lot of the abuses with, as this person said, free labor, money, sex, or power over people is because they're actually not enlightened. They actually have very unbalanced personalities. They've had some spiritual experience, and then they think they're enlightened. In India, you have a guru who qualifies you. And what makes things even worse is some of these teachers are claiming a false lineage that doesn't exist. So that's the problem that we're looking at here. So what's the sweet spot? I wish I had an easy answer. I can tell you the answers that have worked for me, but the first step in this process is learning discernment. Asking questions, like keeping an eye. Let me just see for 1 minute. There's a lot that wants to be said. So that's the problem. The problem is we have unlicensed spiritual psychotherapists practicing psychotherapy, because spiritual teaching in the end is psychotherapy. It's working with the mind and the emotions and your sense of reality and how you live life. So we have a lot of these spiritual teachers are just unlicensed counselors practicing counseling. So first and foremost, we need to be wary, absolutely wary of anyone who claims to be a spiritual teacher, who anyone else claims to be a spiritual teacher. You need to go. This is a Buddhist tradition, which I love. So first and foremost, what you do when you're learning a new teaching is you just put aside your opinions for the moment and you listen. You listen until you're able to have an intellectual understanding of what that person is teaching. You don't evaluate it. You don't compare it with other things you learn. First, you get an intellectual understanding. Then, once you're able to have a mind understanding, then you take it to your heart, your gut, your soul. In the Buddhist tradition, they would say the Buddha within. Then you ask, is this true? Once you have a clear, objective, you could say a scholarly understanding, an academic understanding. Oh, this person teaches this. And then this person says, the goal is this. This person teaches this practice. They say this practice is the most powerful practice. They say that they are the most enlightened being on the planet. You get a neutral, objective understanding of what's being taught. Then you don't drink the Kool-Aid yet. Then you go off and you reflect on it. Is this true? How does this relate or not to relate that other things that I take to be that I know to be true? Then you begin to evaluate and ask. Again, in the Buddhist tradition, you ask the Buddha within. Then you return and you start asking questions. Then you very slowly, hey, is this teacher reliable? Is this teaching appropriate for me? It's a checking. It's like you don't on the first date. You don't propose, right? But that's how I went to satsangs, and that's how most people do. Is they go to satsangs and it's like, oh, this teacher's enlightened. Everything they say is true. If only, if only life worked that way, and it doesn't. Maybe it did at some point in the past. It's not how it works now. There's a quote, I can't find it, but I believe the Dalai Lama, it was attributed to the Dalai Lama. I haven't been able to verify it, but he said, before you enter into a guru disciple relationship, you need to spy on the potential guru for 5 years. Whether or not the Dalai Lama said it, in this day and age, in this spiritual marketplace, in this modern world of unlicensed spiritual psychotherapists practicing psychotherapy, it's absolutely essential. You literally have to get the dirt, see if there is dirt. I could sit here and I could talk. And I've been active in the spiritual world since I don't know 1992 or 93, and I could sit here and talk for a couple of hours of all the crap, money, sex, power abuses that's rampant in the spiritual world. In fact, um, I have a friend, and we'll just call this person S. And S has a very interesting friend who we'll call J. And J is connected to like a lot of the big names in the spiritual world. Um, Jay has a lot of money, and which is interesting. And Jay, I forget the other reason why. I think I'm not remembering this moment. But Jay, having connected to like all the big names, not all, but many of the big names in the spiritual world, his view is that it's completely nuts. Completely nuts. Um, that's my view. I mean, yes, there's some healthy, good things out there for sure, but anything that involves once money starts getting involved, it just gets really crazy really quick. Um, so there's a few pointers on how to survive the modern spiritual world. And if you think I'm being a little hysterical, for example, I know one very famous teacher. Two people committed suicide at different ashrams this person had at the ashram. And in a remote center in another country, someone committed suicide. And what did this teacher do? Disbanded, disbanded the remote ashram. Instead of offering counseling or help to the people affected by this suicide, cut it, disbanded it, because it's a liability and because it's a business. And this is a very famous teacher who slept with who knows how many of his young female students, and has eats so poorly that he's given himself diabetes, and people treat him as if he's God. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, and so that's so I promised I would speak a little on the solution. The solution I have found for myself is first and foremost, I'm not in a guru disciple relationship with anyone. A guru disciple relationship is, literally where you surrender to someone and you assume that they're enlightened and take everything they say is true. I refuse to do that until I spied on someone for 5 years. So first and foremost, here on this channel, I've been recommending people to James Schwartz's work, who wrote an amazing book called The Essence of Enlightenment. And for those who have been drawn to non-duality, it will answer so many questions because it's classical um, non-duality. And so I guess the answer is that in this day and age, maybe there isn't an answer. And um, so part of what I look for in a spiritual teacher is humility and ordinariness. That doesn't mean they can't also be extraordinary, but someone who is very humble and very ordinary, who has an integrated life, and someone who doesn't make big promises. Like, oh, do this technique and everything will be great. Like that's a red flag. And so those are a few thoughts, and I think I'll make a part 2 to this video. I found my own personal solutions, and I just offered one. James Schwartz, a traditional um, satsang teacher who is in a respected lineage. Um, it's really hard because what I want to say is if the teacher isn't allied, if the teacher is not allied with something traditional, just stay away because they're just doing their own thing. Of course, the problem with tradition is we can get boggled down in customs and so forth and so on. And if I had to choose between this day and age, like if I had to choose between a traditional Advaita Vedanta teacher who's received the training and been certified, and some other teacher who like just blasts Shaktipat, blasts spiritual energy, without hesitation, I would choose the traditional Advaita teacher because they will give me guidance to eventually where I'll get to the point where I won't need them anymore. Whereas a teacher who's just doing their own thing, blasting people with Shaktipat, making up teachings, making promises like, oh, you'll be abundant, or oh, you'll ascend in 3 years, or they're completely doing their own thing. And you're never going to graduate from what they're offering, because what they're offering, I can't say every such teacher, but the majority of them, you'll never graduate because they haven't graduated. Thank you so much, angels.